The decadrams of Syracuse are among the most sought after of all ancient coins. So if this is real, this is a home run. One item changed a seller's life in less than 30 seconds. Inside the gold and silver pawn shop, people often walk through the door expecting a few hundred for an old family keepsake or forgotten collectible. But every once in a while, an expert takes a closer look and realizes they're staring at something worth far more than anyone imagined. How do sellers react when they discover they're holding a small fortune? And what happens when they're suddenly offered more money than they ever expected? Join us as we count down 12 times sellers were offered way more than expected on Pawn Stars. Number 12. The Anglo-Saxon Spangenhelm. The first seller walked into the world-famous gold and silver pawn shop carrying an iron helmet he had picked up at an estate sale. He wasn't a collector, just a lucky bargain hunter hoping to turn a $200 purchase into a quick $750 profit. What he placed on the counter was a Spangenhelm, a distinctive helmet made from multiple iron plates riveted together over a metal framework. Originally developed during the late Roman Empire, this design later became the standard headgear of Germanic warriors, including the Anglo-Saxons and Vikings, between the 6th and 10th centuries. Chumley was the first to inspect it and immediately admitted that ancient European armor wasn't his area of expertise. Still, he knew enough to recognize one thing. If the helmet was authentic, it was worth far more than a few hundred. The seller agreed and encouraged him to bring in an expert. The shop called Bob Dodge in from Artemis Testing Lab. One look at the helmet was enough to grab Dodge's attention. Iron is notoriously difficult to preserve. Over centuries, it corrodes and eventually disintegrates. For an iron helmet to survive from the 7th century, it would have needed extraordinary preservation conditions, such as burial in a peat bog, deep water, or an oxygen-deprived grave. To verify its authenticity, Dodge used a handheld X-ray fluorescence analyzer that identifies the elemental composition of metal. The helmet consisted of 99.67% 67% iron along with trace amounts of copper, zinc, and chromium. Its composition closely matched bloomer iron, the type commonly produced in early medieval Europe. Copper, zinc, chromium. This is carbon steel. So, this is what it should be made out of. Because bloomer furnaces couldn't fully liquefy iron, they left behind distinctive carbon and silicate signatures. Everything about the analysis confirmed that the helmet was genuine. Surviving examples are exceptionally rare, especially those that remain largely intact. Dodge estimated the helmet's value at around $15,000. The seller was stunned. Moments earlier, he had been hoping to make a few hundred. Now he was negotiating over 5 figures. He raised his asking price from $750 to $15,000, but Chumley countered with $7,500. Eventually, they settled on an even $10,000. What began as a $200 estate sale gamble had turned into a $10,000 payday. All thanks to a rusty helmet that had somehow survived nearly 15 centuries of history. Finding a 1,000-year-old helmet is impressive enough, but what happens when the next artifact is so valuable that experts initially suspect it has to be fake? Number 11. The Eastern Mediterranean Dadrom. The next seller placed a large ancient coin on the counter and hoped it might be worth around $20,000. Rick Harrison took one look and knew it could be something far more significant. The coin appeared to come from the ancient Eastern Mediterranean world, possibly one of the powerful Greek city-states. While ancient coins aren't especially rare, large denominations like this are a different story. Throughout history, conquering nations routinely melted down the currency of their enemies and replaced it with their own. As a result, very few of these oversized coins survived. But there was a problem. The coin looked almost too good. Ancient coins were struck by hand using primitive methods that often produced uneven designs and off-center images. Yet, this example was remarkably sharp and well-preserved. In Rick's experience, that was often a warning sign. The market was flooded with counterfeits, and many looked convincing at first glance. To find out what he was really looking at, Rick called in an expert. The expert immediately identified the piece as a Syracuse decadrachm struck between 400 and 360 BC. Considered one of the masterpieces of ancient coinage, it featured the nymph Arethusa on one side and a victorious chariot scene on the other. Collectors regard Syracuse decadrachms as some of the most desirable ancient coins ever produced. Now came the big question. Was it real? The expert carefully examined the smallest design details. Counterfeit examples often have a soft, almost melted appearance. This coin didn't. Every feature was crisp and sharply defined. After a lengthy inspection, he delivered the verdict. The coin was authentic and it was worth approximately $50,000. Rick immediately offered $35,000. The seller pushed for more, and after a brief negotiation, Rick increased his offer to $40,000 and the seller accepted. A coin that had spent decades tucked away in a family collection had just become a $40,000 payday. Finding a $50,000 ancient coin is rare enough. But what if the next coin was so scarce that only a handful are known to exist? Number 10. The 1922 High-Relief Matte Dollar. When this next seller walked in with a coin he had won in poker encased in a professional grading holder, Rick immediately recognized it. It was a 1922 high-relief matte-proof piece dollar. One of the rarest coins in American history. Got a 1922 proof high-relief matte finish coin. The piece dollar was introduced after World War I as a symbol of peace. In 1922, the U.S. Mint attempted to strike a high-relief version that showcased every detail of the design. The problem was that the technology of the era couldn't handle it. The dies wore out quickly. Production became impractical and the design was abandoned almost as soon as it began. Most examples were melted down. For years, collectors didn't even know the coins existed. Today, only about 10 are believed to survive. The seller thought $20,000 would be a fair price. Rick could barely contain his excitement. Before making an offer, he called in an expert who confirmed exactly what Rick suspected. The coin was genuine and exceptionally rare. Depending on the buyer, it could be worth anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000. The seller was stunned. Rick opened at $65,000. The seller countered with $90,000. Rick moved to $75,000. After a brief negotiation, the two sides settled at $80,000. Wonder how much the seller had staked in that poker game to get such a huge win. Most people dream of finding treasure in a poker game. But what if the next discovery came from the bottom of the ocean instead? Number 9. The Dutch East India Company Shipwreck Bell. The next item looked like something straight out of a pirate movie. A woman named April placed a large bronze bell on the counter and explained that she had bought it years earlier from a small shop in Indonesia for just $700. According to the seller, it came from a Dutch East India Company shipwreck. If true, it was a remarkable find. Founded in 6002, the Dutch East India Company became the most powerful trading company on Earth. Its ships carried enormous wealth across the globe, and artifacts recovered from their wrecks are highly sought after by collectors. Rick loved the bell immediately, but the old man wasn't convinced. His concern was simple. The bell looked too good. After centuries underwater, it should have shown far more corrosion. To settle the debate, the shop brought in shipwreck expert Carl. After examining the bell, he explained that many shipwreck artifacts spend only part of their lives underwater. Objects are often recovered by locals and preserved on land long before they reach collectors. That explanation fits the bell perfectly. More importantly, Carl believed it was authentic, and his appraisal came in at roughly $15,000. April was speechless. She had paid just $700 for it, yet she raised her asking price to $11,000. The old man fired back with a low offer of $3,000. Rick, unwilling to let the bell slip away, stepped in and offered $7,200. This time, she accepted. After all, a decorative piece that had been gathering dust in an apartment had turned into a tenfold return on investment. A shipwreck relic worth thousands is impressive. But could a small medal connected to one of America's founding fathers be worth even more? Number 8. The George Washington Masonic Medal. When Rick saw this item, he quickly noticed it wasn't a coin. There was no denomination anywhere on it. Instead, the symbols pointed toward Freemasonry, the influential fraternal organization that counted many of America's founding fathers among its members. Hoping to learn more, Rick called in coin and metal expert David Vagey. The moment Vagey saw it, his eyes lit up. This wasn't just a George Washington Masonic medal. It was believed to be the first George Washington Masonic medal ever produced, and only about 20 examples were known to exist. The medal was struck in 1797 by Pennsylvania engraver Peter Gatz, a man who personally knew Washington. Created during the final year of Washington's presidency, it represented a unique intersection of early American history, politics, and Freemasonry. That is a George Washington Masonic medal. And literally, there are more than 10,000 different types of Masonic pennies. The seller had walked in hoping for $5,000. Vagey estimated its value at roughly $40,000. Rick immediately offered $20,000. The seller pushed for more, but Rick refused to budge. After several rounds of negotiation, neither side was willing to move. Then, to everyone's surprise, the seller simply picked up the medal and walked away. Whether the seller made the right decision remained to be seen. One Washington collectible walked out the door without a deal. But what happened when another piece tied to America's first president landed on the counter? Number 7. The George Washington Funeral Medal. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary old token. The seller had owned it since childhood after picking it up at a coin show with his father decades earlier. For more than 30 years, it sat in his collection, and he figured it might be worth a couple of hundred. Rick immediately recognized it as a George Washington Funeral Medal, a commemorative piece produced shortly after Washington died in 1799. Washington's passing sent shock waves through the young United States and beyond. Napoleon Bonaparte even ordered 10 days of mourning throughout France. These medals were created as memorial pieces and were often worn around the neck as a public display of respect. The old man wasn't convinced. The metal looked too clean to be more than 2 centuries old. To settle the debate, Rick brought in an expert. After a careful examination, the verdict came back positive. The metal was authentic, well-preserved, and worth approximately $4,000. The old man opened at $2,000. The seller wanted $4,000. After several rounds of back and forth, the gap slowly narrowed. Eventually, the two sides agreed on $2,500. A small keepsake purchased at a coin show decades earlier had turned into a surprisingly profitable piece of American history. Historic medals can command surprising prices, but could an old military knife hidden away for decades be worth even more than presidential memorabilia? Number 6. The World War II M.H. Cole Knuckle Knife. Family stories have a way of growing over time. According to Danny, his great-grandfather had supposedly killed thousands of people with the knife he brought into the pawn shop. Even though he didn't believe the story, he hoped the old weapon might be worth enough to help pay some bills. The knife immediately stood out because it wasn't just a blade. It also featured a brass knuckle grip,